Very much. Let's get some more now with three U.S. members of Congress whose districts have been rocked by the violence of the past week. Representative Marc Veasey's district includes parts of Dallas. Representative Cedric Richmond of Louisiana represents Baton Rouge, and Representative Keith Ellison's district is only a couple of miles from where Philandra Castile was shot and killed. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Congressman Ellison, 21 police officers were injured in St. Paul, as you know, Saturday night. What's the situation like in your community right now?
Well, you know, the St. Paul Police Department has done a lot to de-escalate violence, do anti-racism training. In fact, they had nothing to do with what happened in Falcon Heights. It was completely different departments. And the activists, the protesters who have every right to protest, were actually trying to de-escalate the harm and have condemned the violence against those officers. The officers, you know, I talked to the mayor, Chris Coleman, today. He's proud of his department, and his department wasn't implicated. They've done a lot of work.
So who is responsible for injuring 21 police officers?
Well, there's some people who were not part of the peaceful protest, but who thought that the right thing for them to do was to escalate the problem. And this is a challenge of the peaceful protesters. Not only are we trying to raise important issues around police violence, but the other end, the extreme end, is we got to try to control them so that we can stay on focus and try to bring the needed reform.
We also know over the weekend, Congressman Richmond, hundreds of people were arrested in Baton Rouge. What are you hearing from your constituents?
Well, in Baton Rouge, we've had a number of protests, and they started back early last year. And we've only had arrested the last 2 days' worth of protests, which are unfortunate, but our governor and others have decided that once roadways are obstructed, that they would arrest. My concern is more along the lines of when it escalates to violence and when police officers are heavy-handed in those arrests. And I would just tell you that we have had young people on the capitals of the state capitol on the steps. We've had young people at police headquarters protesting. But we have not seen the overall violence. But the big question that we have in terms of our arrest are where's the escalation coming from between people who were protesting peacefully for almost a week and now to the point
but
where
if protesters are blocking highways, for example, that's against the law.
Well, we're asking them not to block highways because especially in Baton Rouge where we have not great access to emergency care and other things, that you're actually putting other people's lives in danger. And they have made their point and they continue to make their point. But they are, for the most part, our protests have been very peaceful.
You represent, Congressman Veasey, the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The police chief, David Brown, he's a very impressive guy. I don't know if you know him personally.
Well.
You know well. He said this today. Let me play the clip for you, and then we'll discuss.
We're just asking us to do too much. Every societal failure, we put it off on the cops to solve. Not enough mental health funding. Let the cop handle it. Not enough drug addiction funding. Let's give it to the cops. Here in Dallas, we got a loose dog problem. Let's have the cops chase loose dogs. You know, schools fail. Give it to the cops. 70% of the African community is being raised by single women. Let's give it to the cops to solve that as well. That's too much to ask.
The police do need more help. Chief David Brown is doing a great job. But I do think on the congressional level, for instance, that we can do more to promote the passage of money for community policing grants, for instance. You know, President Obama is really trying to put together a great initiative with his 21st Century Task Force on community policing. What can we do in Congress to promote things more like that? And the answer is that we need more money so we can spread that type of message nationwide.
Is there support legislatively in the House and the Senate for that kind of legislation?
There needs to be, obviously. If I think that we can prevent a lot of the interactions that we see, a lot of the devastation that's been caused by some of these police shootings if we had more programs like that.
You agree?
I totally agree. I mean, look, you know, people are inadequately housed. They're not making enough money. They're relying on there's all these social programs, and we say to the police officers, go handle these problems. We need to invest in our country with good wages, good jobs, good education, and not just and not just say, you know, police deal with it, and if they can't deal with it, then put them in prison. I mean, it is a societal cop-out that the officers have all this stuff to handle.
Congressman Richmond, you know Congress. Is there any chance that's going to pass anytime soon?
Well, I've had conversations with both the Speaker, the Majority Leader, and the Whip about more money for community policing, the COPS program, also safe neighborhood grants, and other things. And I think there's a openness and a willingness to do it. Also, Dave Reichert out of Washington, who's a former sheriff, I just left there talking to him about it. And I think it's something that both sides can come together on, and it's not something we should play politics about. This is our future, and this is far too serious. So I think it's something that we can accomplish.
Right, that's encouraging. All right, stand by, Congressman. We have much more to assess. We're also getting new information, much more right after this. We're back with Democratic Congressmen Marc Veasey, Cedric Richmond, Keith Ellison. Each of their districts was directly touched by the violence of the past week. Tomorrow, President Obama will travel to Dallas to speak at a memorial service for the 5 slain police officers. Former President George W. Bush will be there. He will speak as well. CNN Sunlen Srifati is over at the White House now. Sunlen, the president, will also meet privately with the officers' families. What else do we know?
That's right. Well, he'll meet with the families first, and then President Obama is anticipated to speak at the memorial service. And it's very clear that he is taking a very active and very personal role in the crafting of this speech. The White House saying he's spending a significant portion of the day today huddling with his speech writers. The White House saying that he hopes to bring some measure of comfort tomorrow in his speech, not just to the families of the victims in the Dallas community, but also notably the White House saying he wants to bring some comfort to people all over the nation who are confused and concerned about the violence that they're seeing on TV. So the tone of that message, the tone of his delivery is so important, especially as this president has constantly had to straddle this line between showing respect for the law enforcement community and also hearing and showing concerns of the African American community and the protesters. The White House acknowledging today that the president very well understands the anxiety and the frustration that Americans across the country of all races are feeling right now, and that he will specifically speak to that in the context of the setting being a memorial service. Tomorrow also brings the very unusual joint appearance between President Obama and former President George W. Bush. He was invited by the mayor of Dallas, the White House embracing his role also in tomorrow's event. That this is a reminder that even though there's political differences between them, tomorrow they will come together. Well,
all right, Sunlen, thanks very much. Sunlen Srifati over at the White House. We're back with the 3 members of Congress. I want to get your thoughts on what you want to hear specifically from the president tomorrow. Very important address he's going to be delivering at this memorial service. But first, there were some powerful words today we heard from Dr. Brian Williams, a trauma surgeon who was treating the victims of this massacre in Dallas. I want you to listen to what he said.
We routinely care for multiple gunshot victims, but the preceding days of more black men dying at the hands of police officers affected me. I think the reasons are obvious. I fit that demographic of individuals, but I abhor what has been done to these officers and agree with their families. I understand the anger and the frustration and distrust of law enforcement, but they are not the problem. The problem is the lack of open discussions about the impact of race relations in this country. And I think about it every day, that I was unable to save those cops when they came here that night. It weighs on my mind constantly. This killing, it has to stop. Black men dying and being forgotten, people retaliating against the people that are sworn to defend us. We have to come together and end all this.
He's the trauma surgeon at Parkland Memorial Hospital. Congressman, he treated so many of those victims, but you see how emotionally he is on this issue. I wonder if you can relate to what he just said.
Oh, absolutely. I think that each and every one of us, I have a young son, like Cedric has a young son, and I worry as my son gets older, he's in elementary school now, what his interactions with the police will be like. On the other hand, I understand that if we're going to have a civil society, a society with the free press, a society with the democracy that we have to have police protect us, or we will have anarchy. And so it's a balance, and I hope that President Obama will talk about bringing the community together, that we need the police and the community to have a better relationship. I think that he will touch on those things, and I think it's a message the nation needs to hear.
You heard Dr. Williams say we're not talking enough about it. We're sort of ignoring it right now.
Well, I think that whenever we lose a life, whether it's by the hands of a police officer or when we lose a police officer, the whole country mourns. But we're not having enough dialogue about what's happening on the streets in inner cities. And the president's words tomorrow can heal, but they can't stop what's going on. Congress has to act. We have to put more money back into community policing from when Clinton was president, whether we call it safe neighborhoods. But unless Congress sends a message to the country that we hear you, that we understand these young people, I am very fearful that it's going to be a long, hot, bloody summer. And I think that blood will be on the hands of Congress if we don't do something to act.
What do you want the president to say tomorrow, Congressman Ellison?
You know, the president has to convey to the whole of America that we can be safer and have good police service and have racial justice and inclusion. It's not one or the other as so often is characterized. We actually need both, and we can have both. But we also he needs to challenge all of us to come out of our comfort zone a little bit. Police, community, all of us. We had 246 years of slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow, and only 50 years of anything else. We do have a racial legacy to overcome, but we can overcome it if the president will help lead us in that direction and help everyone have their heart and their mind open a little bit more to real change.
You heard the president say on Saturday, race relations in our country right now, not as bad as some people are suggesting. You agree with him?
No, I completely agree with that. I think that we've made huge improvements. I can tell you I grew up in Fort Worth, and of course we have the same news as Dallas. Dallas is not far at all from Fort Worth, and the police department that Dallas had in the 1980s versus Chief Brown today, as far as racial tension and animosity is concerned, huge improvement. So yes, we've made huge strides in this
country.
Same
in Baton Rouge?
Well, I wouldn't talk about Baton Rouge. I would just say inner cities. And I don't think the race relations have actually changed all that much, especially...
You don't think it's getting better over the years?
I don't. I think that we had a point in time where race relations were getting better, but I think as the economy turned, President Obama became president, I think that everybody retreated back to their respective corners. But I can only speak for young African-American males. Young African-American males, because of over-incarceration, because of the war on drugs, feel like they are targets, and law enforcement views them as a danger to law enforcement, and unfortunately they view law enforcement as a danger to them. And I think that if we can't fix that, then a lot of what we're doing will not reach the ultimate conclusion and won't hit home.
You see that in Minnesota as well?
Yeah, you know, in my state of Minnesota, a wonderful state, one of the lowest unemployment rates in the whole country, and yet the disparities are very, very wide. Average income in Minnesota is about $61,000 a year. For African Americans, it was $31,000 until it dropped to $27,000. And so there are vast disparities. And I think that, look, are things better than they were? Sure, but we come out of a very bad history, and to be doing better than ever is not to be doing good. And so I just think we've got to work a lot harder on healing, and we have got to call on the business community, the law enforcement, and all sectors of American society to open up the doors of opportunity and to make sure that everybody feels included in the society.
Has the awful news of the past week brought, for example, the three of you closer together on these issues?
It has. And let me just say, because I want to be fair, the political discourse in this country has also added, I believe, to the bad race relations.
You think it's gotten
absolutely, and I think that we bear a lot of the brunt of it. If we can't sit down and talk to each other, if we can't get past our differences, then what example are we setting for the country? But we're so negative and we're so nasty that I think that people feed into it. But I think the events of the last week have brought this Congress closer together, and I think it's going to bring the country closer together if we can all sit down and keep our eye on what's important, and that is a very peaceful, safe community with mutual respect.
You know, the three of us were together last week talking about as relatively young black men. We all feel like that searching feels. I mean, we may have kids, right, but we also know that you take off the suit and put on the T-shirt, and we could be going through what Alton or Philando were going through, and we feel that personally and directly.
So when you're casually dressed and you're driving around Texas, are you fearful that a cop might stop you?
I have anxiety every day about being pulled
Every
over.
day?
Every day when I'm back home, and in D.C. for that matter.
Really?
when I'm not in
You
a suit.
too?
We're treated much, when I have on my suit and my congressional pin, even in the halls of the Capitol, I'm treated a lot differently by visitors and spectators when I'm dressed down and people don't realize that I'm a congressman. And I just think it's the world we live in, and I think that that's part of what we have to deal with. And then flip it, with New Orleans, you have 52% unemployment with African-American men. And I just think that we have to look at that as a direct problem and try to fix that problem. And I think that everything else will kind of come along with it.
Because we do have face it, we can fix it. And I believe that we can. But we've got to face it. And the president can help us face the reality. See, the problem is we can't talk about race relations in America without somebody feeling blamed.
Right.
And so we've got to get out of this thing of blame, shame, and say we've got a problem. We're not meeting liberty and justice for all. And we've all got to step up and make that a reality.
Because we do have an African-American president,
We got one.
an African-American attorney general, an African-American secretary of Homeland Security.
46 African-American members of the Black Caucus.
Yeah, you would think, and what I'm hearing you suggest that race relations not necessarily getting better.
Well, when you start looking at 52% unemployment with African-American males, the question becomes, how does that affect race relations? And I think it absolutely affects race relations when you start talking about the economic divide. And if I'm at the bottom end of that economic divide, I'm angry. And I think that that manifests itself in a bunch of different ways. But we have to look at the economic plight of most people.
You know, the truth is, we have some of the most severe economic disparities since the Great Depression. And so it might be true that if you're an African-American surgeon or member of Congress and you look the part, maybe you can lead a certain life for a little while, unless you're mistaken. But the divide is so wide that the African-American poor and working classes, I think, are dealing with much tougher.
I'll give you, Congressman Veasey, the last word.
No, I think that, again, we've made huge improvements. We still have a long way to go. And again, I'll be at the funeral tomorrow, the memorial service with the president, and very interested to hear what he has to say.
You flying on Air Force One with the president?
Yes.
I will have a coverage, of course, of that all day tomorrow. Let's continue this conversation.
Thank you.
Because as that surgeon, the trauma surgeon said, dialogue on these issues. People try to avoid discussing these issues. We don't want to avoid that.
Thanks, Will.
Anymore. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Will.
We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.